Hi, I'm Nicola Chamberlain, presenting at the Equine Clicker Conference 2013 online, and this is part 2 of a comparative review of the use of positive and negative reinforcement in the training of horses. In part 1, we looked at a review of ethics, welfare and law, together with some of the research on the use of positive and negative reinforcement in general and in horses. As a brief recap, we saw that there is substantial evidence to support the predominant use of positive reinforcement in handling and training, which can be reliably applied to most vertebrates, and that this should be the preferred main method of training or incorporated into training and management where possible. However, there is still a common perception at all levels that this does not apply to horses, with government guidelines for England and Wales stating, where horses are concerned, that horses respond best to a firm but gentle approach, indicating negative reinforcement is best. Currently, negative reinforcement predominantly used in traditional riding and natural horsemanship methods. There are some current studies in relation to comparative use of positive and negative reinforcement in horses, which appear to show that there are benefits to using positive reinforcement over negative reinforcement alone, including decreasing anxiety and stress behaviours, improving motivation, possibly improving the likelihood of achieving operant tasks, particularly tasks which may be aversive, improved perception of environment and people, improved welfare, and made for safer handling. So what is the problem? Well, there are still concerns that incorrect application of positive reinforcement could cause frustration behaviours and welfare concerns, but this is so for negative reinforcement too, but which is also likely to cause anxiety. Okay, so this is some of the background that led me to want to undertake my own study into the effects of positive and negative reinforcement in horses as part of my dissertation study in 2012. The main areas that I felt I could look into within my remit were efficacy of training, behaviour observations, and testing whether either reinforcement changed the human-horse relationship. I had available to me 14 riding school horses of varying breed and age, aged between 7 and 20 years. All had been subjected to a traditional reinforcement history. I chose to use positive reinforcement with a bridging signal and free shaping as one method, which I refer to as clicker shaping training, but had to choose a negative reinforcement method that was unlikely to have been used with any of these horses previously, and so chose Pirelli natural horsemanship methods as a comparative. Other reasons I chose Pirelli is that it was developed according to Pirelli 2007 as a result of observing how horses communicate with each other. It is also a method which is taught to owners predominantly via books or long-distance online training. So, being negative reinforcement, pressure is applied, starting with very minimal pressure at first, but increased in stages if not successful. This would allow me to apply the least pressure required in accordance with current government guidelines. Also, in accordance with standard learning theory, an immediate release of pressure would take place with an approximation towards the target behaviour. Due to the number of horses available, I was not able to do a third group of blended reinforcement. This is a summary of the 14 horses within the study. These were pair matched in terms of breed or type and known behaviours such as how easy they were to catch. One of each pair was then randomly assigned to the Pirelli group or the clicker shaping group. All horses were being little used and had been on full turnout for the last 2 weeks, save for horse P2, who was only turned out for 4 hours per day. Each horse then underwent 5 days of testing as per the table representation below. Only 2 weeks in July were available to do this, and so half of the horses underwent training in week 1 and the other in week 2. Pirelli horses underwent testing and training first. On day 1, 2 baseline motionless person tests were undertaken with each horse, which I will go into in a moment. For the following 3 days, each horse would undergo 20 minutes of training in relation to their assigned method. On day 5, each horse would undergo further motionless person tests. This image is a representation of the test and training environment. This was an indoor arena. For the motionless person tests, a person, in one test a known keeper, and in a second test the trainer who was unknown to the horse, would stand in the centre facing towards point A and the mirrors, which were placed at one end only. All horses were familiar in varying degrees with the arena. The person would stand in a neutral position, looking towards the ground with their arms still by their side. Each horse would then individually be brought into the arena by another handler via the entrance on a head collar and lead rope. They would be turned to face the entrance whilst the handler would unclip the lead rope and close the entrance. At the point where the horse was released, timing of a 5-minute period would begin. The test was videoed with a camcorder from the gallery. The video would later be analysed for observable negative behaviours and the amount of time it took for the horse to approach the motionless person recorded. Day 1 motionless person tests were used as a baseline measurement, and Day 5 tests were analysed for any difference in time to approach the behaviours observed. This is an adaptation of other motionless person tests. For example, see Henry et al. 2005 and Hausberger and Müller 2002, which were designed to test the human-horse relationship or the associations the horse made with the motionless person. During days 2 to 4, horses would receive training in accordance with their allocation to either Pirelli or clicker shaping. Each horse would receive introductory training either in relation to Pirelli 7 games, where the horse would be taught to move away from pressure in order to step backwards, forwards, sideways, away from pressure, to the shoulder and neck or head area, or from the hindquarters, or for clicker shaping training, an association was made with the bridging signal, a verbal click, and a food reward. This initial training for clicker shaping was also used to reinforce anti-mugging behaviour, the alternative behaviour being to turn the head away, facing forward, with a calm demeanour. When each horse was performing these behaviours to some degree, they were then introduced to the training test, which was for each horse to touch a static target, a traffic cone, which was placed in the centre of the arena. This novel object could be regarded as potentially aversive to some degree for most horses. Training was also videoed, and the last 5 minutes of training on day 4 was used to count the number of times each horse reached the criterion of touching nose to target in order to evaluate efficacy of training. Here is a clip of video demonstrating a motionless person test. This one was performed with a known keeper, being the motionless person, as a baseline or day 1 test for one of the horses assigned to the Pirelli group. You can see that immediately the horse is released, it is showing frustration behaviours around the area of the exit. Later on, we can also hear vocal calls to other horses outside in the yard. I will let you watch this video so that you can observe some of the behaviours for yourself. Remember, the motionless person is in the centre, but out of shot here. This is the same horse, but in a post-training test on day 5, the same lone keeper in the centre. And this is a clip of video in the same baseline test for a horse assigned to the clicker group, just to show a contrast of different behaviours that were exhibited. In a moment, you will see that this horse is drawn to its own reflection in the mirror. Conspecific images have been shown to reduce separation anxiety in horses. And again, this is the same horse in the post-training motionless person test. It's nice to see that there is no mugging behaviour, although some gentle investigation does take place. This one is a Pirelli trained horse in the last 5 minutes of training on day 4. You can see that this horse is reluctant to take its nose away from the target. Pressure, mostly in terms of body language, is applied, but a neutral position assumed as soon as the required behaviour is performed. And this is an example of the clicker shaping group. Please excuse the white legs, mine, not the horse's. You immediately saw that not all investigation of person behaviours have been extinguished yet. You will also see a little frustration when he is not rewarded after biting the target rather than touching it. However, you may also hear that there was a lot of background noise. Now looking at the results, first of the motionless person tests. In fact, for this study, only the motionless known keeper footage was analysed, although the trainer footage remains available for future analysis if required. The 7 horses from the clicker group are represented in the left columns on this chart, with the blue columns representing the amount of time it took for each horse to approach the person in baseline or day 1 tests, and the red columns the time taken to approach in post-training tests on day 5. We can see that none of the horses approached within the allotted time of 5 minutes in baseline tests, yet all but 1 horse approached in post-training tests. In contrast, 1 horse in the Pirelli group approached within the time allotted, as denoted by the green columns to the right of the chart, but none of them approached in post-training tests. The difference in latencies to approach in post-training tests between the groups was significant, whether using Fisher's exact test or Wilcoxon's signed ranks test, assuming a significance level of p equals 0.05. Only types of behaviours that were clearly observable for all horses upon reviewing the video footage were counted and analysed, and which consisted of event behaviours such as tail swish, vocalisations, pawing, etc. Remember, these were behaviours recorded during baseline and post-training motionless person tests. We can see that the sum of behaviours for the clicker group stood at a little over 30 in baseline tests, whereas the same measure for the Pirelli group was higher at just over 50. However, this difference between baselines was not found to be statistically significant, but care should be taken due to the small sample sizes. However, this chart clearly shows that negative event behaviours dramatically decreased in post-training tests for the clicker group. This difference from baseline was found to be statistically significant despite the small sample size, and which is relevant. Indeed, the Pirelli group also showed some reduction in baseline in post-training tests, albeit this was not found to be significant. And the final results are in relation to efficacy of training. We can see from this chart that all of the clicker-trained horses reached criterion and touched the target at least 10 times within the test period. However, not all Pirelli horses reached criterion, and only 3 horses achieved any successful trials at all. The difference between the groups was found to be statistically significant. The results from the motionless person tests in terms of latency approach indicate 2 things. Firstly, that positive reinforcement training in the form used of clicker shaping had a positive effect on the human-horse relationship and may have changed the horse's perception of humans, which transgressed from trainer to keeper. Secondly, the use of negative reinforcement training in the format of Pirelli method did not improve the human-horse relationship. Indeed, albeit not statistically significant, for one horse, this was shown to have a detrimental effect. The analysis of negative event behaviours also indicate the clicker group were calmer and more relaxed than the Pirelli group, and may have had more positive association with the test scenario as well as people. They also appeared to be more comfortable being separated from their conspecifics than the Pirelli group. With regard to efficacy of training, on initial observation, it would certainly appear that positive reinforcement as applied was more effective than negative reinforcement. However, albeit the training plans for each group were as closely matched as possible, these were different. In addition, although the same trainer was used throughout with similar experience of both methods of training, it could be argued that the trainer could be more proficient in one method than the other. However, you may have noticed from the footage of the trials to touch the target that the Pirelli horse was quite resistant to remove its head from the target and was much slower in its movements. However, the clicker-trained horse was keener to keep touching the target and had a different overall manner, being much brighter and definite in its movements. Could the Pirelli horse be heading towards shutdown or transient learned helplessness? This study can be considered as very much of a pilot, as there were factors which may potentially limit its reliability. These include a difference in environment temperature between the Pirelli group in week 1, which was in fact very cool for July, and week 2 being unusually hot at over 30 degrees for the clicker group. Inter-observer reliability in observing the behaviours recorded may also have produced different results. This is relevant also in relation to the temperature, as the clicker group did perform increased tail swishing as a result of the heat, although this was, in my view, easily discernible. Conformity of training plans has already been mentioned. This could be remedied by stipulating task criterion whereby the training plans could be matched. Also, correlates of neurological effects may have provided an additional dimension to interpretation of the behaviours. However, it was decided not to use the usual correlates of heart rate for this study, as it would be difficult to discern whether this was caused by increased mobility predicted of the Pirelli horses or increased appetitive emotions as predicted in the clicker horses. Cortisol levels were also decided against due to difficulty obtaining accurate readings for the types of horse, some having had particularly aversive histories, as there is evidence that certain conditions in humans, as well as depression or withdrawal in horses, may reduce cortisol levels, which would otherwise have been elevated by stress. Ferro et al. 2012 undertook one such study. Of course, a more representative sample size may have given more accurate probability factors, which would particularly affect statistics that were not found to be significant. Although this may be considered as a pilot study, it does support the main outcomes of the previous comparative studies as set out in part 1 of this presentation in terms of decreasing anxiety and stress, improving motivation, increasing likelihood of a task being achieved, and improved perception of the environment and people. It is easy to see how it could also improve welfare and make handling of a flight animal safer. The results of this study are also in line with the other substantial body of evidence which supports the predominant use generally of positive reinforcement in relation to other vertebrates. It would be nice if there were a review of the guidelines for training of horses by governing bodies now, and which would have a wide-reaching message for all equestrianism, both from a leisure and professional perspective, but in reality this is unlikely. However, information is available now and should be promoted to all those who practice as equine behaviourists, equine vets, all those responsible for equine rescue and rehabilitation, and equestrian colleges. But for me, I see correct application of positive reinforcement as a general way in which we can all improve welfare and our relationship with our horses by using this in our everyday general interactions. Knowledge of the correct application of learning theory and experience as to how to apply this can iron out the problems that can occur from time to time due to frustration, and which is why events such as the Equine Clicker Conference are so important in bringing together that knowledge from those who have been practicing its application for many years now, and in sharing the experience and knowledge with us all so that we can become more experienced ourselves. So I would just like to finish by saying thank you to the organisers of this conference and to those experienced individuals who have helped me and therefore helped my horses and my clients, some of whom have been presented here. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.